Hi everyone, as Michelle said, I'm a Director of Engineering at Canva. I joined a few months ago. So today I'm going to be telling you a bunch of experiences that I've had working with distributed teams, lessons learned over the course of my career, and some new experiments we're trying at Canva and trying to adopt some of these practices. I'm going to talk about inclusive distributed teams, why they matter, and how to build them. What do I mean by "you're the one with the accent"? Let's start with a story. I was recently at a founder diversity and inclusion event in San Francisco. It was a fantastic evening, lots of great content, great attendees, great speakers. And in one of the breakout sessions, there were a number of founders in the room visiting from overseas. And one of the American-based founders just gently observed to the room, "This is really interesting. Hearing all of these accents in the room reminds me of my college days." To which I, tongue-in-cheek, turned to the Ukrainian founder next to me, me being the Australian, and said, "What is she talking about? She's the one with the accent." Got a little bit of a laugh in the room, but more importantly, this really kind of got me thinking, wow, how do people think about distributed teams and having an accent? And so I'm going to talk a lot about accents as more a metaphor, that remember that every single person in this room, including myself, we all have accents. And in the context of distributed teams, that means we all play a role in making a distributed team successful, not just the, quote, remote employees. Let's start with a definition. Inclusion. Inclusion is when every single person in the community is valued, heard, respected, empowered, and feels a true sense of belonging. I'm going to talk to you today about how to build an inclusive distributed team, an environment for your team to thrive in. Now, diversity and inclusion is often discussed with respect to gender, race, age, sexuality, and today I'm going to talk about location as another axis of D&I. I'm going to be focusing on inclusion. Just a brief pause on terminology. This is a personal pet peeve of mine, and I'm going to share it with the room. Some people say remote office, some people say distributed office. What's the difference? They're both the same word, right? No, they're not the same word. There's a really important distinction in these two words, remote versus distributed. In a remote world, you've got a headquarters, a nucleus, and everyone else is remote, kind of a second class of citizens, outsiders. Whereas the language distributed, if you adopt this language, then everyone's a distributed team, including the headquarters, and the language forces people to think, actually, we all play a role in making this distributed team successful. Even if you don't work in a distributed team, by the end of this talk, I plan to convince you that you should adopt distributed practices anyway. So it's for everyone in the room. And I'm not explicitly going to be discussing remote individuals, people working outside of an office, but all the practices that I discuss should apply as well. Today, I'll discuss why the headquarters way of getting work done doesn't scale, some principles for how to think about building out an inclusive distributed team, the role of transparency and communication in your distributed team, how your hiring profile is affected by being a distributed team, and share a laundry list of tactics and lessons learned from having built distributed teams in the past myself. What I'm not going to talk about today is, should you build a distributed team? There's a lot of ink spilled on this topic. I'll save that for other people. Rather, I'm going to focus on you're already decided and committed to building a distributed team, and I'm going to focus on how to do this well. Let's talk about the headquarters way and why this doesn't scale. Start with a show of hands. Who here works in a distributed team? Say that was 50-50. How many people work in a headquarters? And how many people work outside of a headquarters? Great. Let me share some of my experiences working in and mostly out of headquarters. I had the fortunate timing to be Google Australia's first engineering hire. And so this is a shot back in 2006, and you can see I haven't changed a bit. The first team I worked on was Google Maps. And our team was split between Hyderabad, India, Sydney, and New York City. So some pretty brutal time zone differences in the room. And I didn't know any better at the time. This was really my first sincere job. But code review, at Google, you need ownership approval to be able to commit your code. And I needed my code to be approved by the owners who are based in New York City. And so I would write my code, send it off. The next day, wake up to, yeah, it's pretty good. Change this, change that. All right, another day passes. Yeah, could you move that semicolon over here? Cool, yep, done. Ping pong. Hit it back to New York. Actually, I think you should rename that class to this. Hitting it back and forth. Weeks would pass on very simple code review. It was embarrassing how slow we moved. And honestly, I didn't know any better, but now I look back at this as this was not the way to do it. I just took it upon myself to break this cycle, and I would stay up till 6 a.m. Most people in this room probably don't have the luxury to do that, but I would just stay up till 6 a.m. several nights in a row and just not go to bed until I got my approval from the people in New York. And my manager, who happened to be the co-founder of Google Maps, Lars Rasmussen, would stay up till 3 a.m. just so he could rubber stamp a piece of code. Like, it was just clearly a really silly process. So in my mind, that was an anti-pattern. Cut to Twitter. So I joined Twitter in 2011 through acquisition of my startup, Japan. And we started the New York engineering team there. And again, found myself in the position of, hey, we're starting a remote distributed team again. This was really the first distributed team outside of the mothership for Twitter. TweetDeck existed in London at the time, but they just ran their own product, whereas we were deeply enmeshed into the Twitter product. And during my time at Twitter, grew to becoming the engineering lead, which had 80 engineers in it. And it was amazing thinking back to how many battles and how much trailblazing was required to get this off the ground. So when we started the office, I'd visit headquarters. Hey, person next to me, how do I start the search server? Ah, well, I'm glad you asked. Wheels over chair, bash history, looks up. Here's the command, copy, paste, done. No documentation. Meetings. I had meetings that I was invited to with people based in headquarters. There was one meeting I distinctly remember sitting in the room in New York. I'm dialed into the phone bridge before we were using video. No one's dialed in. I email, hey, is the meeting happening? Nothing. Instant message, nothing. Phone, no one picks up. Guess the meeting's not happening. An hour later, oh, sorry about that, everyone. Yeah, we had the meeting. We didn't realize we needed to dial into a bridge. Sorry. Just the culture was still very much in that distributed mindset. Other things that happened, hallway decisions. People would just, let's change the product direction, fail to communicate it. Good luck with that. And another example is my team kept saying to me for the first, I think it was a year and a half, you cannot get a promotion outside of headquarters. And this is just an agreed upon truth in my office. And it was true. No one outside of headquarters had successfully received a promotion. Turned out the way promotions were decided at Twitter in this stage was a group of elders in the company gathered in a room. There was no application process. And people go, oh, yeah, I know that person's work. Yeah, they're good, which was a huge disadvantage to people who are out of sight and out of mind. And during my time at Twitter, we pushed and switched to, let's have people from all the offices in these review committees. Let's actually have a standardized review, promotion review application and remove the kind of subjective nature out of it. So these were the kind of battles, the uphill battles that we started from in Twitter in New York. So those are some of the examples of the classic headquarter way of thinking and why it doesn't scale and some of the challenges that creates. I'd like to share with you some principles in how I think about building distributed teams and making them inclusive and successful. The first one is Adam's hypotheses. The first one is if it's necessary for a distributed team, it's valuable for all teams. Distributed forces process changes that would benefit the entire company. It forces more explicit communication, for example. And coming back to the Twitter example, clearly that like wheel over chair type in the distributed environment, sorry, you actually need to write documentation. Point me to the link. That's essential for a distributed team. It's valuable for any scaling non-distributed team. And I'll share some more examples of this in action a bit later. The second one is asynchronous practices, reduce coupling, and increase empowerment. We've already heard today a lot about autonomy, empowerment, trust. Also, asynchronous practices, they reduce coupling, they allow more productivity, they lead to happier people on your team. Generally, a great culture to strive for. And by practices, I'm both talking about the culture, how the team communicates, for example, and the processes. And I'll go into a few a bit later. When implemented really well, asynchrony enables autonomy, which is key when teams are not co-located, not in the same time zone. This requires strong communication practices as well as a really high trust environment. The third one, this is for all the people who didn't put their hand up to working in a distributed team. You should adopt distributed culture before you have a distributed team. In my examples with Google and Twitter, clearly the code review process, the meeting process was very HQ-centric, and then, oh, we've got to adapt. Rather than having this whiplash from adapting as a company, there's a lot of practices you can adopt immediately that will benefit everyone. And also, the other part of it is, if you don't do that, the burden typically falls on the new officers to make it work. And with the meeting example, that's not possible. You need shared commitment from everyone in your company to make a distributed team work. Things like, I'll just walk over and ask Sarah how we do the blah, blah, blah. No, you can't do that in a distributed team. But it doesn't scale anyway. It's not going to work in your company when you're on different floors, more people, more teams, not everyone knows each other. So start shifting your culture from day one. And finally, distributed teams will become easier over time. If you think back to 10 years ago, we didn't have Google Hangouts, we didn't have Google Docs. It was just starting to get collaborative editing, real-time editing. We didn't have Slack, GitHub wasn't very evolved, things, real-time project management, Trello, wikis, even mobile phones. A lot of technology has shifted in the last decade, and I think it's fair to say that in the next decade, it's only going to get better. And that's been happening in tandem with a shift towards digital nomads and more embracing of remote lifestyles. So this is future prediction that it's going to become easier over time, and so you may as well jump on the trend now. All right, so those are some 4 principles. Let's talk about the role of transparency and communication in your company. If we accept that we want autonomous teams, we need to trust those teams. And if we want to trust those teams, we need to equip them with the information they need and the context they need to make these decisions. And in a non-distributed environment, a lack of transparency leads to misalignment, mistrust. Often you hear the statement, "Oh, I wasn't invited to that meeting," and like people feeling left out and not trusting each other. And this is substantially exacerbated in a distributed environment. If you take decision-making as one example, when decisions are made, think the hallway conversation at Twitter in 2011, not everyone actually needs to be involved in every decision. That's clearly inefficient. But everyone needs to know that a decision was made, and what the decision was made, and ideally, why the decision was made. And we don't need everyone in the room together. So through transparency, we can achieve better alignment. A great way to develop transparency and trust is to act like a hive mind in your team. This means a culture of sharing information by default. If all information is shared, it makes the whole team smarter, better informed, and more aligned, and has this nice property that when one person in your team learns something, everyone in the team learns something. This is an aspiration that I'm always trying to encourage onto any teams that I work with. So how can you achieve a hive mind in your team? Proactive written communication. This is one of the pillars of this, helping people all be on the same page. This includes decision notes. So 2 people in the company make a decision that actually affects everyone else. One of those people who are involved in the decision, it's their responsibility to go back to their desk and write up what decision was made, here's the context so that anyone else who wasn't part of that conversation at least understands what's going on. Call notes. If you have external customers, one person takes the call, but then goes back to their desk and writes up, here's what was discussed, here's the customer wants this, not that. Writes up the notes, shares it, publishes maybe as a post in Slack. Now everyone knows what's going on. It's much quicker to read than to sit in a whole meeting, and people are going to stop saying, I wasn't in the meeting, I want to be in the meeting. It means less meetings and less people in those meetings. A tactic that we used at my last company, Lexi. So we were a distributed team from day one, split between San Francisco and Sydney. And we had a Slack channel called Worklog. And this was a write-only Slack channel for continuous updates on what you're working on. And so whenever anyone in the company switched context, you would write a single statement, doing code review, about to do a job interview, reviewing, I already said code review, that's how much I like it, working on the new foo widget, just a continuous stream. And so now, very cheaply, passively, people have a heartbeat on what everyone else is working on. And this is not just for engineers. Taking a sales call, it's all useful information and context, helps people understand what's going on inside your business. And we found this extremely valuable, very cheap, high value. And definitely we had moments, oh, you're working on the foo widget. I was about to start working on the foo widget. Let's talk. Another thing we tried at my last company, Lexi, was everyone knew everyone else's salary and equity, including what the founders were earning. This is another way of really pushing that point of we're sharing everything. You have no reason to not trust. And a final thought there is if something can be said versus it can be written, it's useful to write it. It takes roughly the same amount of time to write it down, but it's so much quicker for everyone else to get that information and get it passively. Also, another note on all of this. So I'm talking about let's just start pushing information. Let's write everything. Those of you who work in slightly larger companies are probably thinking, but I don't want to have to read all these emails and these Slack posts and these Slack messages. We can't all read everything. And we, as processors of information, make a decision, am I going to actually read the details or just archive, ignore, or skim it? I'd say that this pushes the burden even more onto the author of that piece of communication. Put extra thought into how you value your audience's time, right? TLDR summaries at the beginning of your note, bold little passages. Take an extra 5 minutes and make it 5 minutes shorter, and you'll save 20 people 5 minutes each. Great. Calls to action, call out different people, help value other people's time and help people navigate all this information that we're sharing around. That's transparency and communication to empower autonomy. Let's talk about, in your distributed team, how your hiring profile is affected by being a distributed team. So clearly, we're talking about asynchrony, we're talking about autonomy. We've already talked about T-shaped people today. Autonomous teams, a great way to achieve them is through hiring T-shaped people. So for those not familiar, recap, T-shaped people are experts in one thing, but capable in many other things. If we're talking about autonomous teams in different time zones, we really want people who are capable of unblocking themselves, people who have initiative, people who are able to solve any problem without constant dependencies on other teams. And this is especially important before you reach critical mass in any individual site that you build out. T-shaped teams are great at accomplishing this. And one great example from Lexi was we had, so we did some projects where we had all the skills in one office, and we also did cross-office projects. And we had some tag team projects where someone would get the foo widget down, like build their component out to 80%. They're not done, but they've got to go home. Proactively communicate, write a paragraph, here's how far I got, here's what still needs doing, here are the bugs, push their branch to GitHub, and then wake up the next morning, arrive in the office, and find that the thing had been finished. Someone in the San Francisco office had enough information, context, and skill to be able to grab the baton and run with it. And it's pretty mind-blowing, because this is actually, we managed to achieve, to deliver faster than what could possibly have been delivered if we were sitting in the same room, thanks to parallelism. And at Canva, where I currently work, when we set up local teams, we make sure that every team has all of the skills, the resources, the support, direction, context that they have to succeed. And this is something that we're increasingly investing in. The other side of the hiring profile, good news everyone, you now have access to people that you otherwise didn't have access to. For example, we're not all competing for the same several hundred engineers in Sydney. There's different talent pools where we can now hire from. And also you have access to different types of people. For example, people with families, people who value working from home, different characteristics of individuals. And also, this environment that I'm describing is quite attractive to engineers who like working in an environment where they feel empowered. If it's easy to work from a different city, it's also easy to work from home. I think we can all agree, everyone here, we're all competing for the same talent, so it'd be really great to grow that talent pool. And this is one way to do that. All right, so let's dive deep into an example of what does a process look like if we rebuild it from the ground up in a distributed context. So I already talked about playing ping pong back at Google, staying up till 6 a.m. back at New York, and trying to get code shipped. So a quick show of hands, whose organization does code review? Pretty much everybody. Why do we do code review? A few reasons. Maintains quality standards, allows us to find bugs and catch issues, and it's great for knowledge sharing throughout your team. Clearly, my experience at Google playing ping pong with the opposite side of the planet showed that there's got to be a better way than this current flow. And so at Lexi, distributed between 2 time zones, 2 continents, we tried to rebuild this from the ground up with all the principles that I outlined already. We switched to doing code review after the code was merged and after the code was already deployed and in users' hands. I'm already seeing some that can't possibly work faces in the room. So bear with me all. When we first tried this at Lexi, we did not think it was going to work for very long. We were like, let's see how far we can get with this. And it kept on working and actually kept getting better for us. We hired a few people who actually were like, I'll join you crazy people, but this code review thing, I don't know about this. And by the end of their time at Lexi, they were absolutely convinced and now frustrated to work in any environment. So a really interesting learning was it became really clear that the post-commit code review process that we developed was not just valuable across oceans, but extremely valuable even for teams for people working in the same location. What do you need to pull this off, to do post-commit code review? Firstly, you need tooling that supports it. So GitHub does not currently support this out of the box. We found Fabricator had an audit process, and so this is already set up for post-commit code review. Instead of playing ping pong and then merging, it's merged, and then you mark concerns on the code review, and then it is the onus on the original author to come back and address those concerns. And the concern does not get lifted and removed from the inbox until this has been addressed. This certainly starts to encourage much more thoughtfulness and investment in things like testing. So if you're pushing straight to production and into users' hands, you really want high test coverage to detect your issues before it gets there. And so this is kind of, with great power comes responsibility. Now everyone on the team needs to start writing better tests. Detection and recovery, we need great tooling to detect when we have broken production and great tooling to be able to recover. And at Lexi, every engineer had admin rights to every system. That might be a bit controversial for some companies, but it worked really well for us. And that's a great segue into we need responsible people and people that we can absolutely trust in the team. So it has a huge impact on your hiring profile. What are the benefits of this post-commit code review? For authors, it means less blocking on code review. It means less nagging other people. Hey, have you reviewed my code yet? Have you reviewed my code yet? And it allows you to move on with your work without accumulating lots of branches. And a really fascinating side effect that came out of this is we discovered it forced more thinking on the author's part. Instead of this notion of, it's okay, the code reviewer will catch it. They'll find my bugs for me. They'll tell me how to structure my code. They'll tell me what to name my classes. This forced a lot more conscientiousness from the authors of code. And side bonus, much tighter feedback loop. Now that I'm committing my code, continuous deployment, it's in users' hands, can immediately start to get metrics, feedback, see how the users are using my feature, act on that, instead of these week-long deploy cycles. For code reviews, we talked about flow. Harry talked about flow earlier today. Great for reducing context switching. As a code reviewer, there's nothing that makes me feel worse than, oh, I'm blocking other people from getting their work done. But at the same time, I can't constantly just get interrupted, otherwise I'm never going to get my job done. Although, of course, code review is part of my job. And so the calendar on the left is what it looks like when you're constantly time slicing and doing code review. And the calendar on the right is what it looks like in the world of post-commit code review, which is I'm going to review all the code that was committed yesterday, today. So you can block out in your calendar and allocate a certain amount of time. Everyone in the team can, we had a process of just pulling code reviews off the queue, but maybe you want to have the appropriate delegation to the right people. But it meant for us, get your code review done in the morning and then flow, precious, precious flow for the rest of the day. It was really enjoyable to be a code reviewer in this world. Some fine print on this code review world. You can still do pre-commit code review. Don't have to go wholesale. This is really valuable when you're making changes to the database schema or to RPCs. And that's a good segue into just in this culture of trust and autonomy, everyone is expected to make pragmatic decisions. So if I'm about to make a change that if I got it wrong, it's going to take a month to clean up, but it would have taken a day to figure it out the right way, let's do the day. But that's try and get a culture of everyone making that decision of valuing each other's time to recover from errors. And it allowed people to personally assess risk. As an engineer, I'm probably closest to the code. I'm closest to the feature. Thanks to transparency, I understand how our users use our feature. So I can make the pragmatic decision of how risky is it for me to push this change. Oh, it's way too crazy and it's 11 p.m. and I had a beer, so I'm not going to do that. I'll do it tomorrow. Or, you know what, the cost is really low. And reminder that this isn't no code review. This is post-commit code review. All code is still reviewed to an extremely high standard. It's just we've flipped the order on its head. So that's a deep dive on one process. I'd love to share with you some tactics and experiments run at various companies I've worked at. The first one that's really powerful for a distributed team is having an always-on video link between your teams. This took us a while to arrive at the conclusion of how valuable this was. This is all about reducing the barrier. If we're talking about inclusion, this is about reducing the barrier for everyone to feel that they can start a conversation and communicate with each other. Also, this is an early shot of our team, but back at Lexi, but we evolved to having daily stand-ups in a circle, a virtual circle around the video conferencing unit. We left it on 24/7. It allowed for quick Q&A. Like, hey, Jeremy, why did you build this with using that library instead of that library? Wheelchair over to video unit, talk. Like, the barrier is much lower than, let me find a room. It's all about reducing that barrier. And one of my proudest moments was when somebody in Sydney sneezed and someone in San Francisco said, bless you. That's how we knew that the team was really feeling well connected. And it started to feel incredibly odd when the unit was disconnected, even if no one was talking to each other. Just feeling connected to this other team, really valuable. Please, if you're going to do this, just put a bit of effort into getting it right. We got it wrong before we got it right, but these 4 factors really matter. Get good microphones and cameras. We found Zoom was much better than the competitors 2 years ago at audio clipping, and for us, we experimented with it and found audio matters so much more than video. They're both really important, but if you can't hear the details or the softly spoken people in the room, you lose out. Internet matters. We actually moved offices because we had rubbish classic Australian internet in one office, and we moved to a 100 megabit office. And we also found, surprisingly, a huge factor is investing in the machine that you run this video conferencing on. So we got a Mac Mini for that. That's video conferencing. Another one that's really important is travel. Well, these are some great practices around asynchrony. You still need synchronous time. Synchronous time, especially like having this FaceTime, is really important for bonding and connecting as humans. You can't have lunch together and a beer on a Friday, so getting together occasionally to do that, even meeting each other's families. And this is a photo from yesterday. At Canva, we currently have a number of distinguished guests visiting from our Manila office, and we ran a workshop together where we had the people, we have some designers, it's a cross-functional team, engineers, designers, product managers, copywriters, all in a room, banging on tools, lots of great ideas coming out of it. These are some of the things you can do when you're in a room together. How often should you do it? Your mileage may vary, but I'd suggest at least, 5, I've got 5. I was gonna go 4 times a year, so maybe we'll take Michelle's 5 times a year. And again, on the distributed versus remote point, it's not just about everyone visiting the mothership. The onus needs to be distributed. But please, I haven't booked my flight out yet, so I'm not honest yet, but I want to go visit Manila. Everyone should go every direction, otherwise it really still feels like that remote team. And a lot of travel happens between Manila and Sydney, and Canva also now has a China office that is growing, and no doubt over time will become increasingly more distributed and global. The last one, this is slightly more controversial, and I'm having a lot of fun inflicting this one on my colleagues at Canva, is the regular practices of mindfulness. So at Lexi with San Francisco and Sydney, every single day at our daily stand-up, we started with mindfulness. Anyone could volunteer and exercise, and we performed this over the shared group exercise. They could be pause and stop breathing, like mindful exercise, like close your eyes, be calm. We did some stretching, stretch your eyes, stretch your arms. We always had a good laugh with those. And sharing. For example, everyone share with the group a time you screwed up in the last month, which is a great way of showing vulnerability, having a laugh. And because we don't get to bond over lunch every day, it was a really great forcing function for us to remain and feel connected to each other, not just in this transactional stand-up reporting sense, but as humans. And benefits we found, it helped us feel more connected as humans. It also helped people feel a bit more level-headed heading into these meetings, a bit more proactive rather than reactive. And super powerful cultural norms started emerging. So in the spirit of, this was an experiment we ran, what did we learn? In some founder meetings we had, when you're doing a startup, things are not always smooth sailing, and we had a few tense founder meetings, and it was a perfectly acceptable cultural norm for someone to say, you know what, this is a really important conversation, we're all getting a little bit edgy, let's take 1 minute, close our eyes, and do some breathing. It was really incredible, just kind of like a palate cleanser, resetting the tone of the conversation. And really excited, Canva has an internal coach, she's amazing, and she recently taught a class that I attended called Calm and Confident, how to remain calm and confident as the company is going through hypergrowth, which involved breathing exercises. So this all sounds a little bit hippie to people who haven't done it, but I am a total convert on the power of mindfulness. And cutting to the wonderful world of Canva. So we are building out our global team. Sydney, China, Manila for now, but more to come. And this is a photo from 2 weeks ago. We did a recent planning day, and you can see on the TV screen, people in Manila dialed in, people in Sydney. We did combined exercises across the video link. We did team building, where everyone was paired with someone in the other office and had to find things in common. We did a distributed brainstorming exercise. It required a lot of work to get the video conferencing good. Someone took live streams of notes, a lot of planning required, but it was important. And fantastic feedback I got just last week from someone in the Manila team saying, for the first time ever, the Manila team, the team working on this project, they have a deep understanding of why they are doing what they are doing, not just what they are doing. They now have the context and the understanding of why what they are doing fits into the company's mission, and now they're empowered to make better decisions and help tell other people, hey, no, actually, I think you should do that, not this. Another note on this is, and I get exposed to this with Manila, China, and Sydney, is different countries, different cultures have different communication styles. So when you're building out that distributed team, please be conscientious and thoughtful to how different cultures relate to each other. So to close it out, some takeaways that I hope I've left you with. First one is share the load. Making a distributed team successful is not just the, quote, remote team's responsibility. It's the onus should be distributed. 2, trust enables autonomy and empowerment, and it leads to better results. For example, the post-commit code review flow I discussed. Transparency and proactive written communication are really important for any company, but they're absolutely critical to a distributed one. When hiring, hire generalists, scrappy individuals, and proactive communicators. And I've shared a bunch of tactics with you all. For example, always on video, mindfulness. Please don't be afraid to experiment, and please share back what you learned. And as my closing thought for you all, a reminder that we all have accents. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adam.